Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the first of what will be hopefully many episodes focusing on mod comparisons and different ways you can do the same thing in different mods. Now, the first thing that we'll focus on, and the point of this episode, is to look at how you can double your ore production in any way, shape, or form. And today we're going to be looking at 5 mods in particular: Industrial Craft, Thermal Expansion, Tinker's Construct, Factorization, and RotaryCraft. And the way we will judge these mods is based on the ease of setup, ease of automation, and upgradability of the different ways that you can convert your ore into more than just one ingot per ore. Let's take a look at our first mod, Industrial Craft. Industrial Craft is one of my favorite mods, especially because in the beginning it was one of the first mods that allowed you to double your ore value. In essence, you got 2 ingots per ore, and the way you did that is with this nifty little device right here, called the macerator. Now, the macerator has a very simple interface. You can put an RE battery, or any other battery down here, your ore up top, and that will slowly macerate it into dust. For example, if you put iron ore in, you'll get iron dust out. Put gold ore in, you'll get gold ore dust out, and so on and so forth. You can also hook it up to an electric power system, and there are wires available in the mod. Now, the nice thing about the macerator is it's really easy to get early in the game. You just simply make an electric circuit, which is manufactured by taking copper cables, redstone, and an iron plate. Copper cables require copper, and so on and so forth. You need to find some rubber, which means you might have to do a bit of exploring. So it's not the easiest to get early in game, but it's still pretty easy. The basic machine casing is made by taking a bunch of iron plates and putting them in a furnace pattern. The way you make those iron plates is by taking an iron ingot and a forge hammer. Now, this forge hammer can be used 80 times. If I take this iron plate out, notice it has a damage value now, and there are 79 uses left. The forge hammer is also pretty easy to make. Some sticks and some iron. Not too bad early game. Just finding the rubber tends to be the hardest part. Powering it is also not that hard. You can use a generator. Basically put your charcoal down here at the bottom. It heats up and builds some EU. Now, I have this hooked up to an EU network, so it's automatically dumping its EU into a bat box hidden in the floor. Generators are pretty easy. More iron plates, an RE battery, once again requiring some cable, but this time tin cable, some tin item casings which require more hammer work. But it's not that bad. To get the iron furnace, just take 5 iron plates and surround a standard Minecraft furnace. Of course, these batteries do require redstone, as does our original macerator recipe, in the form of the electronic circuit. So that does mean you need to go on a bit of a dig to find this redstone, but it's not that hard to find. Powering a generator is really easy. Charcoal, or coal, or wood, or any number of burnable items. Now that you have your macerator powered, you can take your iron ore and wait, and wait, and wait a little bit longer, and eventually you will get 2 iron ore dust out of this. It does take a little bit of time, but you can upgrade the macerator, which I'll show in just a little bit. There we go. So 1 iron ore becomes 2 crushed iron ore, what was formerly known as iron ore dust. Old-timers like me still get confused. Take your crushed iron ore, put it in an electric furnace, and that'll cook right on up into your iron ingots. So you in essence get 2 iron ingots per iron ore. You just have to wait a little bit longer, and it takes an extra step. Now, one of the things you can do is, of course, make solar arrays. In this case, I've made a medium voltage solar array, which makes a ton of power. And the reason I did that is because there are ways of upgrading the macerator. Now, because I'm using a higher amount of power than a standard generator, I've put in one of these transformer upgrades, and I can drop in these overclocker upgrades. Now, each individual overclocker upgrade decreases the process time by 70%. However, it increases power usage 160%. In essence, you're trading time for increased power usage. Now if I go ahead and drop some iron ore in, it's still going at its standard slow speed, but I can load it up and it goes a little bit faster, or I can dump a bunch of these in. And look at that, we're actually even draining its internal buffer of energy. We're using more energy than this medium voltage solar array can handle. But you get stuff a lot faster. It's a trade-off, and it's something to be considered. Let's go take a look at our next mod. Okay, we'll take a look at our second mod, thermal expansion. Now, thermal expansion is also pretty easy to get early in game, using its block known as the pulverizer. Now, the pulverizer has a similar interface. You need a place to put power, or you can hook it up to a power network. In this case, it uses RF, or redstone flux. You have a place to put in your ore, and a place for it to dump out. Now, the pulverizer has a slight advantage in that it's got 2 spots to dump out, and this third extra spot. We'll get to what happens in that third spot in a little bit. To make it, essentially take some copper ingots, pistons, machine frames, and redstone reception coils. Now, these 2 aren't that hard to make. A machine frame is just simply some glass, gold, and iron, and your redstone reception coil is made up of redstone, gold, and more redstone. Really simple and easy to make. To power it, you'll need one of these steam dynamos, made with redstone, a copper gear, and a transmission coil. Transmission coils are made with silver, which is added by the mod, and redstone. You also need some copper gears, which are just simply copper surrounding iron. Really simple and easy to make. Steam dynamos can be powered off of an external steam source, but they can also be powered using charcoal. In this case, if I put some charcoal in, and because it's a steam dynamo, I need to add some water. And there we go. Charcoal heats up water, makes it boil, creating steam, which is what actually powers it. Now we can see how much RF it's making here. It's making 80 RF per tick, and its maximum is 80 RF per tick. We're outputting 40 RF per tick into this pulverizer. Now the reason it's slowed down is because the pulverizer is full of energy. If I want, though, I can go and put in our iron ore, and it will start processing it. Now we get pulverized iron out, and each one of these pulverized irons makes an individual iron ingot when we smelt it. But there's this extra slot, and that's because there's a slight chance, whenever you pulverize ores, to get a little bit something extra. It depends on the ore. In this case, iron will make pulverized ferrous metal, also known as tin. So if you have any other mods that add nickel, sorry, not tin, nickel. If you have any other mods that add nickel, you can get extra pulverized ferrous metal here. One less thing for you to hunt down. Now the other cool thing about thermal expansion is that it has these ports on almost every block. And those ports are ways for you to configure how each block inputs and outputs to blocks around it. In this case, I've made a very simple setup that automatically processes ore. I've got an input chest here, leading to a hopper, which goes into a pulverizer, and I've set up the blue to be input on one side, yellow is going to be output to the top, and red is going to be output to the right. I've set up the redstone furnace to input on the left and input on the top, and that's because this secondary output is going to go to the hopper. Finally, it'll output to the right into this chest here. So let's take a look at what happens. Automatically, it has been fed into the pulverizer, which starts processing, and automatically sends it over to the redstone furnace. This makes it really easy to set up an early game automation. The redstone furnace, of course, dumps it out into a chest. So you could load up this chest with any ores that you get after a mining expedition, and instantly have it process while you are away. Now what about the secondary stuff? Well, that'll go up this pipe into this other hopper, where it'll wait until the redstone furnace is clear of iron. Once again, really easy to automate with this mod. and that's one of the big strengths. There is a downside. There is no upgrade slot, so there is no way to speed up these furnaces or these pulverizers. This is the speed that everything runs at. It's a pretty good speed, but you're not going to get anything faster than this. Your best bet is to set up multiple pulverizers and have them all work together. So let's go take a look at our next mod. Okay, let's take a look at our third mod, Tinker's Construct. Now, Tinker's Construct is really interesting in that it's all about making custom weapons, but it can also be used to double your ore value. And to do that, you'll need this device here called a smeltery. It's a multi-block structure, and it's made by making a 3x3 floor of seared bricks, and then walls up to any height that you want. You can do 1, 2, or I think it goes up to 32. So you can make a really, really big smeltery. You also need a smeltery controller and a seared tank. And also to get liquids out, you'll need a smeltery drain and a seared faucet if you want to pour it into casting basins or a casting table like I've made here. Now these are really easy to make. All you need are some seared bricks, which are made by cooking up some grout. Grout itself is made by taking sand and gravel and some clay in a crafting table. Now you can also take the 4 clay balls, make a clay block, and then take 4 sand and 4 gravel, once again combined in a crafting table, and you'll get grout out. Cook up that grout, you'll make some seared bricks, 4 seared bricks in a crafting table, make a seared bricks block. In a furnace style, we'll give you the smeltery controller. With a piece of glass in the middle, we'll give you a seared tank. Like this, we'll give you a drain, and finally in a V shape, we'll give you the seared faucet. Construct in this sort of fashion, and fill your seared tank with some lava. Now to start melting down your ore, just drop it in to the smeltery. I'm going to fill up everything that we have for a grand total of 18 iron ore. Now if I built my smeltery quite a bit bigger, I could put in more than 1 piece of ore. Actually, I could put in, I think it's 9 for every height that I make. So you can make a pretty big smeltery and melt down a whole bunch of iron ore at once. And they all melt at the same time. The number in here does not affect the speed. So you can actually end up outpacing a macerator and a furnace by making a really large smeltery. And one of the cool things with a smeltery is you can actually see things as they happen. So right now it's filled up with that iron ore that's slowly breaking down, and once it breaks down, we'll get some liquid iron down at the bottom. It should appear any second now. This does take a little while per ore, but as I said, you can make a much bigger smeltery, and there we go. Now we have some liquid iron down at the bottom of our smeltery. And we put in 18 iron ore, and we got 36 ingots out of it. Now right now it's still molten, and so what we need to do is pour it out. Now I've made an ingot cast here. I can pour it into my ingot cast and get 1 ingot's worth of iron. I can also pour it into these casting basins and get a nice big iron block all at once. I find this much more useful for storage, especially since you can later on craft that iron block back into ingots really easy. And now we have our iron block. One of the other cool things with the smeltery drain is they do respond to redstone. You can also use various liquid pipes. In this case, I'm going to use a fluid duct from thermal expansion and set it up to take stuff into the pipes, apply a redstone signal, and there, it has poured out our iron into a casting basin. So you can make an automated casting device using any sort of duct work, and one of these smeltery drains and some redstone. This is quite useful in an automated process setup. Now one of the other cool things is you can customize your smelteries with different kinds of decorative blocks. You can use them in any way, shape, form, order, however you want to do it. you can make your smeltery, not the very simple one that I set up over here. To make these ingot casts, you need to make a special kind of alloy. That's the other cool thing about the smeltery, is you can use it to make different kinds of alloys. So I'm going to put in 3 aluminum ore and 1 piece of copper ore. Now, in the real world, aluminum does have a lower melting temperature, so as you can see, it's heating up faster than the copper, which has a slightly higher melting temperature than aluminum. Also, if we take a look, we can see we have our 3 aluminum and 1 copper. In just a little bit here, we'll get our liquid aluminum. There. It's kind of a weird pinkish color, but hey, pink's okay. And now we just have to wait for our copper to melt. And when it does, we'll notice that our molten aluminum will combine with the molten copper to form molten aluminum brass. And it's always 3 aluminum to 1 copper. Now you can take this and pour it out into your casting table, and if you just do that, then you'll get a simple blank cast. And that's not terribly useful. So if you made a mistake, you can go ahead and put the blank cast back in. But if you take your iron ingot and put it down first, and then pour your casting material over it, now we have an ingot cast, exactly like the one over here. And this is how you get individual casts, or individual ingots out of your smelteries. If I put down a nugget instead, let's put down a nugget, I can even make a little tiny nugget cast. Or, I guess not. They must not have added that in this version that I'm using yet. There's another blank cast. So we can go ahead and melt that back down and recycle it back into more molten aluminum brass. We can even take our ingot cast and melt that back down as well. It's a great way of recycling all your materials back into your smeltery. Pretty cool. So let's go take a look at our next mod. Okay, let's take a look at our 4th mod, Factorization. Now, Factorization is really interesting in that not only do you double it, you can actually get almost 5 times the number of ingots per ore using this mod. It just requires a very complicated setup. It requires making 4 different pieces of the puzzle in order to make all your iron. You need a lacerator, like this, which is a socket part. So that means you also have to make a socket here. So the socket's pretty easy. Lacerator's a little bit more complicated. You need to make a motor, which requires some insulated coils, a battery block, and so on. Once again, you probably should have NEI in your installation whenever you're playing with mods, so you can always look this up. Now where it becomes a little difficult is these diamond block shards. Now, if I try to look this up in NEI, it won't pull up a recipe, but there's a big hint. It says it's an exploded diamond block. I wonder how we make that. Well, here I've set up a nice little obsidian pit, mostly for blast resistance. Put down a block of diamond, put down a piece of TNT, and finally activate our TNT. And run away. Probably going to blow up this stuff. Boom! And now we have a whole bunch of diamond shards, specifically 18 per block. And you can go ahead and craft your cutting head. Next you'll need a mixer. A mixer is pretty easy to make. Got some lead, a standard Minecraft cauldron, another motor, and a fan. Fans are just simply 5 pieces of iron in a cross shape. Your slag furnace, pretty easy, 2 regular old Minecraft furnaces, and some cobblestone. And finally you'll need the crystallizer if you want to go all the way to the end. And that's super easy, a cauldron, string, and a stick. But don't let this simple recipe fool you. These actually are complex machines. So let's see how they work. First off, they'll need some electricity, and like a lot of mods, it adds its own power source. In this case, you'll need a water boiler and a steam turbine. You'll also need the wires, And you don't necessarily need a battery, but I went and put one down anyway. Wires are easy, 3 lead ingots. The water boiler is also pretty easy. Iron ingots and some iron bars. Same for the steam turbine, another fan, another motor, and finally a glass plane and some silver to make your mirrors like I have here. These mirrors reflect sunlight during the day to the boiler, which makes steam, which powers the steam turbine, which makes everything go. Now, let's say you don't want to go through and set up all of this silvery mirrors. You can go ahead and use a different kind of heat source, put it right next to your boiler. That's this thing called a calorimetric burner. This one's really easy to make. A piston, sticky piston, bone, and some leather. Sulfuric acid is pretty easy, just some gunpowder and coal, or if you have a mod that adds sulfur, add that with some coal and a water bottle. Now how does this work? It does produce heat, but it needs a fuel source. That's where we can use our pork chop. Listen to this. And there it is, cooking away our pork chop for heat. It's not too powerful, but it is something. Especially if you don't want to spend all the material resources to set up a number of mirrors. You don't need this many, but it does help because the more mirrors you have, the more electricity you'll generate. So you need to run your electrical wires directly to the lacerator. Now, a lacerator is set up with a barrel in front of it, standard oak barrel, and a chest in the back. To start using this, we need to take our iron ore and load it into the barrel. And you can see that the lacerator starts spinning up and grinds up our iron ore. I went ahead and did some of this, and we make dirty iron gravel. You take that dirty iron gravel and throw it into the mixer. Now you need to normally use a water bucket like this, but instead if you have something that adds capsules or other things, in this case these capsules are from forestry, using beeswax, anything that it takes to get water in here. You can go ahead and drop the dirty iron in, and it'll start processing right away. Once again, the mixer does require some electrical input. It processes pretty quickly, and you end up with some of this clean iron gravel and some sludge. Now each step of the way, you have a chance of doubling what you get out of it. There we go. Now we have a lot of clean iron gravel, and you put that into a slag furnace. And the slag furnace, once again, is a way of potentially doubling your ore. If it does double, you'll see it down here. So you'll get one up top and one down below. It's not always a guaranteed thing each operation, but you do sometimes get doubling, and that's what really makes this mod powerful. And there we got some doubled reduced iron chunks. Now we actually aren't done yet. We can do a little bit more, and that's this crystallizer. Now the crystallizer makes these crystalline iron, which I went ahead and made some before. To get the most out, you need to fill everything with your reduced iron chunks and some aqua regia. Now aqua regia is pretty easy to make. Well, perhaps not that easy to make. You do need to go to the nether and get some fireballs and some netherrack powder or blaze powder and some sulfuric acid, which we saw how to make before. It is a little more difficult, but it does reward you in that it's another doubling step. This aqua regia, once you make it, is never used up, so the crystallizer is quite useful in that respect. Also, you get to see your crystals slowly growing. You can see down there, right above my crosshairs, is a little seed, and over time that seed will grow. The crystallizer takes a long time to run, 20 minutes in fact. That's a whole Minecraft day. But once you're done, you'll get this crystalline iron, which you can go ahead and melt down in your standard furnace. In this case, I'm powering the furnace using a furnace heater, which uses some electricity. Don't even have to put any charcoal in, which is pretty cool. And then each of these crystalline iron makes an iron ingot. After all of this, you probably will get about 4 to 5 times the number of ingots per ore. So you do get a good return, but there are 2 problems. First off, it's a multi-step thing that's really, really slow, especially taking the time to do the crystallizer. If you don't want to wait for the crystallizer, you can take the stuff out of the slag furnace and directly melt it down, but I do recommend waiting for the crystallizer, especially since the crystallizer recipe is cheap. Just make a bunch of them. Secondly, this mod is a little difficult to automate. Because of all these slots, you need to balance out the number of items in each slot. And the mod does provide these routers where you can set them up to go into individual slots. But this does make it a lot more difficult to automate. So you can get a decent return, but it is a lot more difficult to use. In the end, though, I think it's worth it to get extra iron out. Not only do you double it, but you get quite a bit more. But before you decide to dive into factorization, let's take a look at our last, and what I say is one of the best mods, even if it is a little more difficult to use. Let's take a look at that now. Okay, our final mod, fifth and final mod, and what I think is one of the best mods, especially if you want to double your ore, is RotaryCraft. Now it is complex. Initially in the setup isn't too bad, but it's powering it that becomes a problem. You need to make one of these extractors. Now the extractor looks complicated, but it actually is really easy to use. It's just difficult to power. To make it, you'll need a work table, and to make a work table, you'll need some steel. Now steel in this mod is actually really easy to get compared to some other mods, let's say RailCraft, and that is you make a blast furnace, give it some gunpowder and some coal, and fill it up with iron. Now every operation it will use a coal, and it might use some gunpowder. The other thing is you need to make sure the temperature of the blast furnace is up high enough, and one way to do that is to put some lava directly underneath it. Now because I am currently in a desert biome, it is at 640 degrees C. You need to be above 600 degrees Celsius to make steel. Now if you're in a snow biome, this won't be quite this high. In fact, it'll be below 600 degrees Celsius. And the way that you fix that is by adding some extra heat, either a piece of netherrack with some flames next to it, or perhaps consider relocating to a better biome. In the end, you'll get some of this HLSA steel. Now you need this to make a lot of the mod parts. You'll need it initially to make the crafting station, and then you'll need it to make all the different parts of the extractor. You'll need a drill, which is steel, an impeller, which is some steel around a steel gear, which is more steel, a shaft unit, which requires more steel, and finally a base plate requiring, yes, even more steel. Then you'll need a piece of netherrack, oak wood, and stone. Now how to use this is actually somewhat complicated. The first thing you need to do is add in some water. In this case I have a reservoir filled with water set up via a pipe to drain directly into an extractor. Now if you notice, the extractor, I've made some already, the extractor requires 4 power, 4 speed, and 4 torque. That's because there are 4 separate processes here, and each one has their own speed and torque requirements. Now the mod uses watts as power, and watts is done by multiplying your torque by your speed. Speed is measured in radians per second. Torque is measured in Newton meters. Some people you'll hear will say nanometers. This is wrong. Capital N, Newton. Newton meters. It's a measurement of force. In this case, I have taken a gasoline engine, which uses ethanol as fuel, and ethanol is derived from sugarcane. So you do need a farm to run this. And then that will make power, and I've got it running into a 16:1 reduction unit. Now if I turn on our gasoline engine, it'll start reducing our power. In this case I have it set to torque. So it's going to reduce speed, divide it by 16 from 512 to 32, and multiply our torque by 16. Everything trades off. I've traded off some speed for additional torque. And with this I've been able to power the first and last stages. So if I want to start processing a piece of iron ore, this is good for the very first stage and the very last stage. And I can do multiple parts at once. Now every time that an operation happens, I have a chance of doubling my ore into something, of something else. It's not always guaranteed. And let's see if we get a doubling output. Yes, this time we got a double. We got 2 iron ore dust. Now this process won't happen until I give it enough speed. We're going to wait for our iron ore solution and see if we get some flakes out. I did make a lot of this earlier just to test it out. Let's see if we get flakes, and we just got 1 flakes from that. Additionally, there's a certain chance that you might get something else. Now to get more speed, we take our screwdriver, shift, right click, and now I've put it into speed mode, and you can see how everything's running a lot faster. And now that'll be enough to get the second process. Ooh, we got another doubling again. And finally, it'll go through the process after that. And there. As you can see, you rapidly double it. In general, you'll get about 5 times the amount that you put in. So if you put 1 whole stack of ore in, you'll get 5 stacks of flakes out. This is what I was running before. In this case, I got 5 stacks plus 6, and I got a little bit extra, which is some of that aluminum powder. Now, in order to run this thing at full speed, you'll need a much more powerful engine. In this case, I have a magnetostatic engine. Now, there's a bug in the GUI which shows that its speed is set to 0 radians per second, and that's not correct. I set it to its max, which is 2 kiloradians per second. To power this thing, you'll need some RF, which is of course provided by thermal expansion. Now, thermal expansion energy goes in, and RotaryCraft power goes out. And I have this running into a 4-to-1 gear. In this case, it's set to speed. So we're losing some torque at the cost of speed, or at the gain in speed. And this is enough, 512 Newton meters, and a speed of 8 kilorads per second is enough to fully power everything. And you can go ahead and drop your ore in, and it will start processing all the stages at once. And you can add the ore in any particular order. So if you happen to stop it for a while as you need power for something else, you can go ahead and restart it and go ahead and load up wherever it needs to be. So now we're getting quite a bit out of this. And take your ore flakes and throw them into a standard furnace and get regular iron ingots back out. This is a pretty good way of making and doubling your ore value. It just requires a bit of a setup. Now, there is a way of making this go even faster, and the way that you do that is by giving it yet more power. In this case, I've set up a gas turbine. Now, gas turbine runs off of jet fuel. Now, this guy uses a lot of fuel. Lots and lots and lots of fuel. Now I need to, there we go, pipe some in. In this case, my pipes were all set up wrong, unfortunately. So bear with me for just a second while I set up my pipes. And hold on, I'll be right back. Alright, we're back. So I had to redo some of my fuel lines, and as you can see, this thing sucks in a lot of jet fuel in order to run. Now, to get this started, you just simply apply a redstone signal. There's a controller hidden in the floor, which you'll need to craft on your own. And there we go. Now, this thing crafts really quickly. Let me take out all of my test materials here and drop in a fresh stack of iron ore. And you'll see, not only are we powering everything, but things will start going faster and faster until it's almost instantaneous for pretty much every step. There we go. Now you can make this thing go really, really fast. Ridiculously fast. These 2 steps do take some more time. You do need higher speed for them. If you wanted to, you can put it through a 2-to-1 and get a little more speed. And that's probably what's recommended if you really wanted to get this thing to start cranking. Now, it does use a lot of fuel. And there is one other big danger of the jet turbine. Notice I have these fences, and I'm standing way back from it. As you can see, it tries to suck me in. The reason for this is, well, let's get out our little test buddy here, the sheep. Boom! Sheep instantly gets sucked in and destroyed. Not a good thing to have happen to you. These things do require quite a bit of control because they will suck you in. And additionally, you can see there's now little bits of stars coming out of it every now and then. That's because it's been damaged, and it will not work as quickly as it did before. But, you know, that's the price you get for processing your ores and materials really, really rapidly. Alright guys, that wraps it up for this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. I do hope to make some more. If you liked it, give it a like, subscribe, you know how this works. In general, I usually recommend starting off with thermal expansion in the early game, mostly because of its ease of automation and the ability to just sort of have everything process automatically. That automation really is key. It also starts off being slightly faster than RotaryCraft, but RotaryCraft has its quirks, namely that it requires a lot more power to start speeding things up. Tinker's Construct is also a really cool mod, but really thermal expansion, I believe, wins in early game for its automation. Later on, I do recommend moving on to Factorization or RotaryCraft. Factorization, a little more difficult to automate and somewhat more difficult to power. RotaryCraft does require complicated power setups, but a gasoline engine isn't too hard. Just keeping everything lubricated and filled can be difficult, but the payoff is definitely worth it. So I hope to see you guys next episode. I'm not exactly sure what I'm going to cover. If you have any suggestions, go ahead and leave it in the comments. See you later.